evening and welcome to Gen TV. My name is Malik Lenzonzo. Look like we're having some difficulty with the network. Uh, Paul, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
All right. So we are here today. First of all, welcome to the network again. I wanted to summarize a little bit the reason why we're here today. This is a very important topic, not only for people in Ukraine, but also internationally. So I just wanted to give a little perspective on the war in Ukraine, and then I will bring you back on the work networks to try to give me your opinion on your perspective here at home and probably also international. So again, I'm here with Mr. Paul Pumphrey, who's a socio-political analyst and the co-founder of the Friend of Congo. Together we will, take on the war, the impact of the war in Ukraine. So, like I said, this is a very important topic, and it has to be, approached with a lot of understanding of what's going on. You know, the ongoing war in Ukraine has had significant impact on the various aspects of the country, its people, and the region as a whole. Here's some keys impact of the war. Humanitarian crisis. The conflict has caused a severe humanitarian crisis with millions of people affected. It has led to the displacement of almost, over 17 million people, both internally, internally, and as refugees. In the neighboring countries, many civilians has lost their homes, access to basic services, the livelihood, resulting to a desperate need for humanitarian and casualties and loss of life. The war has resulted to a substantial loss of life, and casualty, like I said, thousands of soldiers, civilian and separatist fighters has been killed by or injured since the conflict began in 2014. The toll on human life and the long-lasting impact on families and communities cannot be overstated. We also have economic impact. On the economic impact, the consequences of the war severely impact Ukraine economy. The ongoing conflict has disrupted industries, infrastructure, um, and trade, and leading to the decline in production, investment. The country have faced significant economic challenges, including inflation, currency devaluation, high unemployment rate, political and social division as well. The conflict of deepened in a political and social division within Ukraine. The war has highlighted the existing fault, line between different regions, ethnic groups, and the political ideologies. The struggle the struggle for control over certain territory has fueled tension and polarized among Ukrainians. So this is a little bit some of the you know information based on fact that we have. And Paul, I don't know if you can still receive. It look like I have some issues with my connections. But the bottom line is, this ongoing conflict is there is no sight of this conflict being, the end of this conflict is very soon. As far as our perspective is concerned from the United States, so you are somebody who always been at the forefront when it comes to social justice. when it comes to speaking truth to power. You're always somebody who look the truth directly in and speak out your mind. When you see this ongoing conflict, and I've given some aspect of the impact of this war.
Well,
Uh,
I think there are a number of points we need to look at when we look at the war in Ukraine. Not only look at what's going on in Ukraine, but let's look at Europe itself.
okay,
The war that Europe and NATO had against Libya, which was totally uncalled for, totally destroyed the economy of Libya. And actually, you had situations that went all the way back almost 2 centuries where they were actually taking Africans and putting them up on the slave block and selling them for free labor. Now, when the people tried to escape and go across the Mediterranean into Europe, European countries did almost everything they could to try to hinder them from being able to do this. And this was a war that Europe gladly was involved in and created the situation where people were fleeing Libya. Now let's look at Ukraine. Now you got a war in Ukraine, and European countries are saying that Ukrainians, white Ukrainians coming into their country, get a free pass. They're allowed to work. They give them housing. They give them food. They give them all kinds of things when they didn't, as they see it, created the war in Ukraine itself. And so you have to wonder about the policies of of Europe around this issue of dealing with Ukraine. Because African students that were going to school in Ukraine were told they couldn't ride the train to try to get to a safer area to protect themselves. Many of them had to walk as much as 1,200 kilometers to try to get to safety. And then when they got to those borders, often they had tremendous amount of difficulty in being allowed to go into the countries to try to get to safety where they could then figure out ways on how to get back home. So that was one thing that struck me about the war in Ukraine, was how Europe reacted to that war when it dealt with people of African descent and the white Ukrainian citizens coming into Europe.
so
They
Paul, if we see that if this because earlier I don't know if I went deeper talking, for example, about the human right abuses. The conflict in Ukraine has been marked by numerous human right abuses, including arbitrary detention, torture, extra judicial killings. Both sides of the conflicts are being accused of the violation, impacting the rules of law, and the protection of fundamental human rights. So I think globally, it looks like we have a situation here when it comes to human rights. Period. Both sides. What do you? Um,
Well,
uh,
again, let's don't start looking at Ukraine in January of last year. Let's look at what happened 8 months before January, before any Russian troops came into Ukraine. Ukraine used its military to fire on its own people and killed roughly about 8,000 people that was of Russian speaking citizens of Ukraine. And the world, as far as Europe and the United States and Canada, said next to nothing about those killings. They didn't challenge the government of Ukraine in any way about the killings they did there. And in fact, that was one of the rationales that Putin used for why he entered the war, was because the government of Ukraine was allowing for the Nazi militias and even the regular soldiers, the regular army of Ukraine, to attack the Russian speaking southern part of Ukraine. And nothing was said. You didn't find the European countries offering those people who were being attacked abilities to come into Europe and live and work without a permit. None of that happened. And so we can't just look at a situation behind what the United States and Europe want us to look at it. We have to look at it in its totality. What were the conditions that led to that war in the first place? Another part that was interesting about it is that when the Warsaw Pact dissolved and West and East Germany was allowed to unify into one country again, there were a number of agreements made by the United States and NATO that they would not move NATO further east towards Russia. And you had presidents like Clinton and Bush, who in fact moved NATO into former Warsaw countries, moving closer to the border of Russia. And at the same time, a number of those countries, NATO gave them nuclear missiles, not pointing towards Western Europe, but pointing towards Russia. Now, one has to ask the question, do we not forget about what happened in 1962 when the United States was harassing Cuba and Cuba asked for assistance from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union agreed to bring nuclear missiles to Cuba? And the President Kennedy at the time made it very clear that there was no way in the world the United States would allow that to happen, and that the United States would be willing to go to World War III before they allow nuclear missiles to be into Cuba. And Cuba doesn't even border the United States. And here you have NATO with nuclear missiles moving closer and closer towards the border of Russia. And Russia very clearly stated over and over and over again that they were not going to allow Ukraine nor Georgia, that borders their border, to be a part of NATO. But yet you had Bush talking about having Ukraine part of NATO, and then Biden, no sooner he got in office, he started talking about making Ukraine a part of NATO. So I think when we look at this war, we have to look at it in totality.
Absolutely. But you know what? There's a point I want to make.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there was a quick point I want to make, Paul, because it looks like you are pinpoint an existential issue here. You know, no superpower. America is a superpower. I think Russia also is a superpower, a nuclear power country. No powerful countries of that magnitude will allow a threat at this border. And you're absolutely right. You know, the United States is not going to allow Russia to put some, missiles in Cuba or in Canada at the border. That would be an existential threat. That would be, something that you have to do. Otherwise, your existence is going to be diminished, or at risk to be diminished. So we understand that historical, and I thank you for that historical reminder of the missile crisis, the Cuban missile crisis. But now that we have gotten to this point, and I was talking about how much people we have lost already. The humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is tremendously incredible. How much money, the West, including the United States being number one on the list, the aid to the Ukrainian is incredible. So as far as the impact is concerned, when you see that we still have some issues here going on, you as a concerned citizen, is anything that come to your mind when it comes to the end of this war? You think, but if America continue to support this war, do we can we expect any end of this war
Well,
anytime soon?
here's a question I think the people here in the United States needs to ask our government. Why are the lives of Ukrainians more important than people who are U.S. citizens here in this country? Why is the United States taking money and threatening the Social Security system? Because they claim they have no money, yet they give almost a blank check in buying arms to send to Ukraine. Why is the United States opposed to any government making an effort to try to negotiate a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, China boldly negotiated a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two countries that were bitterly opposed to each other for a number of years. But they now are shaking hands and actually allowing for diplomatic relationships and embassies being opened in both countries. And then China makes an offer to try to negotiate a deal between Russia and Ukraine. And immediately the Biden administration says they want no part of that. At the same time, the Biden administration is taking necessary U.S. tax dollars that should be used to address the needs of people here in the United States. And they're buying weapons to send to Ukraine to escalate the war. This is a question I think people here in the United States needs to question the administration here in the United States. Why is it that our government is so bent on promoting war between Russia and Ukraine and not looking for any possibility of a negotiated peace agreement? At the same time, we run around and they just had an agreement to extend the U.S. debt. And in that agreement, they're taking money from Social Security. They're taking money from many of our social programs here in the United States on the idea that they claim that they have to do a certain amount of cuts. But one thing they did do was expand the amount of money that they're spending in the U.S. military. So why is the people of Ukraine, deserve more of the U.S. tax dollars than the needs of the people here in the United States?
One might argue that it's probably an emergency, humanitarian crisis going on, people or dying, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's beside the point that we have to take care of our people first before we invest heavily on different nations. That's the accurate, because in the end, politicians always have to keep in mind that the people of Ukraine won't vote for the president. It will be all congressmen. They are elected officials. So the people of the United States will be the voters. Do you think this issue of war will be on the ballot? Is going to be affected in the next election?
I think really what you're looking at is, as we move into another electoral season, both the Democrat and Republican Party are looking for large contributions from the military-industrial complex to their campaign funds. And I think that happens to answer the question as to why that decision was made. But the question we need to ask ourselves, do we need a government that in fact pays more attention to corporate greed than to the citizens' needs for health care, for relief on their huge college loans that many of them have taken out? In fact, many people have made decisions as to where they even try to find a job because they know they have to pay back their college loans. And the better paying jobs is in the military industrial complex. And so you have our country taking our graduates from the universities and not addressing
When you say in the military and when you say the military industrial complex, you mean military contractors?
of course, of course. I mean, they're the ones making hand over fist and money because anybody that knows much about the military industrial complex, you would know that in fact, dollar for every dollar invested, there's less people employed for every billions of dollars spent in military contracts. There are much less people employed in jobs because they're being paid for the so-called technology, not for the work. And as you well know, a few years back, they talked about how they were having $25 toilet seats put into aircrafts and stuff along this line. And so it's an extremely highly profited industry where and then you stop and think. When President Biden got into office, one of the first cabinet members he chose was his Secretary of Defense. Now, where was this man working before he was chosen by President Biden to be the Secretary of Defense? He was on the board of directors of Raytheon. At the time, the third largest military industrial complex corporation that had contracts with the US government. But he's only been there for less than a little bit more than 2 years. And already, Raytheon has moved from being third largest receiver of US tax dollars to being second, only to that of Lockheed Martin. So obviously, Raytheon has gained a tremendous amount of wealth since their board member, their former board member, left their board to become Secretary of Defense. So we have to ask ourselves the question, are these decisions being made to benefit military industrial contractors? Is that the purpose behind why President Biden, thinking that he would get major contributions from these contractors because they're now getting a much larger percentage of our tax dollars? I mean, at the same time, have you just take a trip down Washington, D.C., ride down Virginia Avenue over by the State Department. Look at how many tents are there. People living out in the streets. And I don't mean just living out in the streets now. They were living out in the streets in the middle of the winter, living on the sidewalk, on the grass. In fact, on the front yard of the State Department, you find people homeless living on the streets. You hear Congress talking about making cuts in Social Security while they are steadily giving more and more money to the military industrial complex. Should not be the goal of our government to try to seek peace where possible, rather than say we're not interested in peace in Ukraine at all, but we will continue to take U.S. tax dollars, hard-earned tax dollars, and give it into the military industrial complex to send more and more weapons. I mean, does this not take us back to what happened in Afghanistan? United States spent $2.3 trillion in Afghanistan.
So
within 2 days. Within two
you
days.
I want to
Okay.
stick a little bit about Paula. The point I was trying to make is, since you mentioned peace, and after a while, we and like the French president said that the president of Ukraine, have proven to be a courageous man, a war president, and all kind of accolades. But it has to be time to think about peace, because the impact of that war on that country is tremendous. And maybe later on, or maybe probably on a different show, we can speak about reconstruction, how much it's going to cost for that country to be to be given enough resources to rebuild the country. Now, as far as the peace is concerned, um, what will be in your mind? It's kind of a strategy, or maybe do you think America is ready to speak, maybe to reason to speak reason to Ukraine to back off? Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't think on a technical, possibility that Ukraine can really win a war against Russia. Uh, and my fear will be that if Russia being a wounded, dog, if pushed too much against the wall, can possibly think about the possibility of you using nuclear weapon. So, what could possibly be the scenario here when it comes to a possibility of peace? And do you think
Well, again, I think that
America can
scenario.
be a broker for that peace?
Yeah, I think that scenario only happens when the people of the United States demand that their interests are taken first by the government of the United States. Obviously, it makes sense that the United States should support a negotiated agreement towards peace in Ukraine. But the point is what is driving the policy? The policy seems to be driven by money. Money coming from the military industrial complex to the politicians, both in the Democrat and Republican Party. And they keep spending more and more money of our tax dollars in the direction of war in Ukraine rather than address the social needs of our communities right here at home. And so until the people of the United States demand that our government take interest in the people of our country, and especially President Biden, because he seemed to be very, very anxious to get
But
this
when you
war.
say the government, you got to keep in mind this is the both party though. The
When I
Congress
say
have to
government, I'm
decide.
talking both Democrats and
Both,
Republicans because both of them are looking for money from the military industrial complex. And this is why, no matter what type of agreement that they make on spending money, the military expenditures keeps going up. So they're still taking more and more of our tax dollars, putting it into the military. And where's the money coming from? Addressing social needs of the people of our country, the people who are actually paying their taxes themselves. And we need to remind ourselves that about 35 years ago, the highest income people in our country had a tax liability as high as 93%. Today, their tax liability, the highest tax liability they have is now 15%. It's lower than a person getting up going to work every day. The average person going to work, a tax liability is around 28%. But you have somebody like Lockheed Martin, the people owning the major stocks in Lockheed Martin or owning the major stocks in Raytheon, their tax liability starts at 15% and goes down. So they got way more money, yet a much smaller percentage of their income actually is tax liable. And this is why you have companies like Amazon last year not pay a penny in federal taxes, even though it's
but
considered.
Amazon been getting away with murder when it comes to paying taxes for a long time. And also, one other point that I wanted to make, talking about the impact of this war, is the fact that the United States made it clear that some of their friend and ally around the world were not supposed to be taking part making or sitting on the side of Russia, but it looks like that threat, including some of the I think the Congress did pass some resolution or something like that to trying to kind of scare people that want possibly be on Putin or Russia side. But what we've seen is that more and more some countries are standing openly and saying, "Hey, listen, we have nothing to do with this," and if any, it will be that Russia is doing what it's supposed to do. If you feel threatened, and that they know that NATO, by the border of Russia can be a existential threat, like you said, that is something that they understand, and we can see, South Africa, for example, openly invited Putin in South Africa. You can see even small countries like Equatorial Guinea standing with Russia. So my thing is, if the United States fail to bring the international community outside, NATO allies, its NATO allies, if they fail to really bring the international community to kind of quarantine um, and Russia, then it's going to be really, really hard, because then Russia have some room of operations. Russia be able to continue to do business with countries in Africa, and then that will put them in a position of not really worry about continuing to destroy Ukraine. So in the end, I think the exercise that I want to do here is to try to think about possibility of getting out of this war, because nobody, no human being will love to be in the situation of war for so long. So you know,
Well,
and you said clearly that in the United States, this is not about just Democrats or just Republican. Both parties, literally, or they have agreed to support. This is a proxy war. So some people, yourself, in some comments, you have mentioned proxy war. So is this the way we really want to help Ukrainian?
well, the
You
first,
think it will be too late to ask for Ukraine not to join? The Westerners. I mean,
the first thing, NATO doesn't have a vote on whether or not it becomes a member of NATO. United States does.
okay.
And so it's in the hands of the people of the United States, not Ukraine. It's in the hands of the people of the United States whether or not we want justice for the people, not only of Ukraine, but the people here in the United States. We have to demand that the United States take care of the needs of the people of the United States. We watched our government for 20 years spend $2.3 trillion on Afghanistan, supposedly training the military, supposedly establishing democracy, supposedly destroying the Taliban. It only took Biden to announce the date in which the United States was going to leave Afghanistan, and the Taliban was in control of Afghanistan before the US troops even left. The military in Afghanistan disappeared within a day after he made that announcement. So, obviously, what the United States claimed they were doing with our tax dollars in Afghanistan was a lie. We obviously weren't training a modern military inside of Afghanistan, because after all, they described the Taliban as folks living in caves. So how is the modern day US military trained soldiers of Afghanistan couldn't handle people living in caves? And how much of the military equipment, how many billions of dollars of US military equipment is now in the control of the Taliban? So we really have to question our politicians as to their sincerity on whether or not what they're telling us, they honestly even believe it. Because again, $2.3 trillion. Have to think, you could have affordable housing for everybody in the United States. You could have a free healthcare system like they do in Canada, or even better than the one they have in Canada, all for $2.3 trillion. We could create necessary jobs, such as we're talking about moving into a green economy. Well, imagine if that money was put towards making solar cells that could create the electricity necessary.
Paul, you have 2 minutes left. Go ahead and conclude.
Okay, and so I think that we really have to begin to ask ourselves the question: is our government, both Democrats and Republicans, doing what's best for the people of the United States? As well, are they doing what's best for the people of Ukraine by insisting that they do not try to negotiate a peace agreement with Russia? And I would say no, they're not. Our government is more interested in putting more money in the pockets of the military industrial complex than they are in addressing the needs of the people of our country.
Absolutely. Absolutely, my brother. Listen, Paul Pumphrey, if you join us now on Talk to Me, this is Mr. Paul Pumphrey. Is a socio-political activist and co-founder of the Friend of Congo. Mr. Paul Pumphrey is the usual suspect on Gen TV, political analyst here. We want to thank you. I think the audience been missing you. Thank God you're back on the show. We love your perspective. You're giving a different perspective from the mainstream perspective. So we'll look forward to speak with you probably next week again on a different topic. Something you want to add real quick?
Yeah, one thing else I want to add, and that is that the president of Nigeria has already said that a number of the weapons that went to Ukraine happened to find their way into the Boko Haram inside
Wow,
of Nigeria.
wow.
And I
Is
was
this
sure
is
the
this the
same thing.
verified information?
Yes, they made
Wow.
that statement about 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. And
Okay.
so the bottom line is that Ukraine has been known for being extremely corrupt
Yeah.
and how it
Before.
handles its money. And
Yeah.
so it's not surprising that the weapons we're sending over there, they're selling on the black market.
Mm,
And a lot of those weapons may end up in Africa, killing innocent families in Africa. So yes, that's another concern that people should have, is that United States have no real accountability system to even make sure that the weaponry that they're bringing into Ukraine is staying in Ukraine for the purpose
absolutely.
it's for in Ukraine.
Absolutely. All right, my brother. We're gonna leave that right there. Your appearance on the show is gonna continue. Like I said, the audience, you'll be here next week again to give us a perspective, and probably Africa is gonna be on the table because there is a lot that you probably have to say. When it comes to the Africa United States relationship. So we want to thank you, my brother, and look forward to speak with you next week, certainly.
Thank you for the opportunity for me to be able to share my viewpoint.
Ab- Absolutely. All right. So yes, like I said, if you're joining us now, that was Talk to Me with Mr. Paul Pumphrey, social political activist, and he's a co-founder of Friend of Congo. So today's topic was the impact of the war in Ukraine. And like you heard, Mr. Pumphrey said, and I said this at the beginning, that uh, it is important and to know that the impact of the war in Ukraine is a complex and multifaceted, and the consequences extend beyond point mentioned above. affecting the social fabric, psychological well-being, the future prospect of the Ukrainian people, the effort toward peaceful resolution, and the supporting the effort of population are crucial, for addressing the long-lasting impact of this conflict. So, we just pray that superpowers, including the United States, European Union, to really, you know, find a way to stop this ongoing war, because nobody, no family, no human being would like to be in a situation of war. And somebody said, sometimes you know when it start, when the war start, and it always hard to know when a war end. So with that, we say thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have question or comment, make sure that you leave us question and comment below the page, so that we can know exactly what to improve with our show. Again, that was Talk to Me with Malik Lenzonzo, and we will talk to you probably another time. So have a wonderful weekend here at home and abroad. Bye now.